There are nights history doesn't argue with. Storm nights, harvest nights, execution nights. Nights where records agree without needing to explain why. Nights that feel heavier even before anything happens. And then there is Christmas Eve. Not because it is joyful, not because it is holy, but because it is watched. That was never written down, never carved into stone or taught in schools. It didn't need to be. It lived in habit, in routine, in small inherited behaviors that survived long after their reasons were forgotten. People didn't travel on Christmas Eve unless they had to. They didn't sleep alone if they could help it. They left lights on even when it wasted fuel. They locked doors that didn't usually need locking. And if something made noise outside, if the wind shifted strangely, if footsteps sounded too close to the house, if knocking came from a direction where no road existed, they didn't investigate. They stayed where they were. No one followed those rules because they believed in them. They followed them because someone once didn't. And whatever lesson had been learned that night, no one ever wanted to explain it twice. If you asked directly, people changed the subject. If you pressed, they smiled thinly. If you insisted, they told you it was superstition. But superstition doesn't shape entire calendars. Superstition doesn't create gaps in records. Superstition doesn't leave empty places at tables that stay empty year after year. People plan their lives around Christmas Eve. Quietly, subconsciously. They finished errands earlier. They returned home before dark. They postponed trips until morning. They stayed together. They stayed inside. They stayed awake. And when someone didn't, when someone decided they were immune to old habits, or smarter than old fears, or simply unlucky enough to forget, that absence did not fade. It lingered, not as a memorial, not as a grave, but as a hollow space. A pause in conversation when a name almost came up. A chair that no one ever claimed again. A silence that returned every December 24th, whether anyone mentioned it or not. In old ledgers, parish books kept near the altar, county logs written in careful ink, handwritten journals maintained by men who measured time by frost, harvest, and snowfall. There is a pattern. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. You only notice it when you stop looking for people and start looking for dates. December 24th. Again, and again, and again. Sometimes the language is cautious. Failed to return. Last seen en route. Presumed lost. Sometimes it is blunt. Missing. Gone. No recovery. The words change. The outcome does not. There are no blood-soaked reports, no courtroom proceedings, no panicked manhunts. Because there is nothing to chase, just absences. A man steps outside to bring in firewood, his coat still hanging by the door, his boots gone cold by morning, and he never crosses the threshold again. A child is sent to check the lantern in the barn. Her footprints move steadily across the snow, then stop, not scattered, not turned back, just ended, as if walking had ceased to be necessary. A family's house burns while the town sleeps. No screams, no neighbors awakened by panic, no remains found when the embers cool. Investigators say the fire burned too hot, that nothing could survive it, but years later, other fires burn hotter, and they still leave something behind, always the same night. Christmas Eve, and then there are the nights with nothing at all. Entire December 24th where records fall silent. No births logged, no deaths recorded, no crimes reported, not torn pages, not missing books, just absence, statistically impossible. Administratively inexplicable. Historians call them anomalies, Archivists call them clerical gaps, but old coroners used a different phrase: nothing we could certify. Because how do you certify a body that never arrived? How do you document a death that left no location? How do you investigate a disappearance where the last known action was simply going home? Those nights remain blank, unclaimed, as if the calendar itself refused to acknowledge what happened. Modern minds ask the obvious question: why didn't anyone search harder? The older answer is simpler. Because people believed the night belonged to something. Search parties didn't go out after midnight on Christmas Eve. Not because of cold, not because of weather. Because if someone vanished that night, they were assumed to be taken during the crossing. That was the phrase, the crossing. A time when paths overlapped, when the dead moved the way the living used to, when roads remembered feet that once walked them, when doors that meant nothing the rest of the year suddenly mattered very much. It was believed that if you chased what crossed over, you might follow it back. Snow preserves truth, until it doesn't. Investigators fear footprints that end, not turn, not scatter. End, no drag marks, no signs of struggle, no indication of direction. Just a sudden suggestion that walking was no longer required. This has happened repeatedly on Christmas Eve, across centuries, across borders, across landscapes that share nothing except the date. Every explanation is the same. Environmental distortion, wind interference, evidence compromised. But conditions do not erase intention. Some houses earn reputations, not because something happened once, but because something happens again. A fatal fire one year, a missing tenant the next, a sudden death decades later. Same room, same night. These houses develop habits, doors that won't stay closed, rooms that remain colder than the rest of the house, chairs that shift slightly between glances. Realtors don't mention it, inspectors don't document it, but neighbors know. They lower their voices when they pass. They avoid windows facing the structure. They never accept invitations on Christmas Eve. There was a church once, small, wooden. It burned down long before living memory. But the bell survived, at least in sound. Every Christmas Eve just before midnight, people heard it. One toll, never two. Old belief said the bell rang for those who died unfinished. Travelers murdered on the road, victims of fires. People whose names faded before justice could form. The bell wasn't calling them back. It was telling them the door was open. The rule was simple. Remember us, and we will pass through quietly. Fail to remember, and someone else will need remembering next year. This wasn't superstition. It was logistics. They are not demons. They are not monsters. They are closer than that. They are the people who didn't make it home. The ones whose deaths were quiet. The ones whose disappearances were easier than explanation. Christmas Eve was the only night they were allowed to return, to walk the road again, to stand at the door they never crossed, to sit at a table where their place was once expected, but acknowledgement was required. A chair left empty, a fire kept burning, someone awake to witness. If no one remembered them, they didn't leave alone. Every generation produces rule breakers, people who investigate, who follow, who assume curiosity is protection. Some come back changed. Some come back silent. Some come back convinced that Christmas Eve isn't haunted. It's scheduled. Something arrives whether anyone is prepared or not. And the disappearances aren't random. They're corrections. Electric lights replace fires. Noise replace listening. Sleep replace watching. And the disappearances didn't stop. They became accidents, incidents, tragedies with no cause, cars found wrecked with no mechanical failure, houses burned with impossible patterns, people found miles from where they should have been, undressed, uninjured, dead. Always December 24th, always late, always alone. People think the rituals were symbolic. They weren't. They were practical. The empty chair wasn't remembrance. It was occupancy. An unclaimed space invited something else to sit there. The fire wasn't warmth. It was direction. Light told the returning dead where they were allowed to go. And staying awake. That was the most important rule of all. Sleep meant vulnerability. Unconsciousness meant consent. Someone had to see the night pass, because Christmas Eve was never meant to be survived unknowingly. It was meant to be witnessed. That's why the disappearances almost always involve people who are alone, or asleep, or the last to leave the lighted room. When the rules were followed, the night passed quietly. When they weren't, someone became the offering, not chosen at random, chosen because balance was lost. So here's the question people used to ask, and stopped asking out loud. Are the dead returning on Christmas Eve, or are the living responsible for what happens when they forget how to receive them? Because if the rituals weren't superstition, if they were safeguards, then every modern Christmas Eve, brightly lit but unwatched, is a night with no witnesses, no boundaries, no one paying attention. They never told you why Christmas Eve was a ghost night, because once you understand the rules, you start wondering, who paid the price this year?
Madness and Macabre.